Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sarah Chaudhry. I'm the Director of Communications here at the college. I'd like to thank you for joining us for today's educational session, A Closer Look at Competence, presented by Christina Van Sickle and Sue Botello. Before I introduce our speakers for today's session, I would like to go over a few housekeeping items, which you've probably heard already throughout the day. This session has live captions, so to turn on the captions, click the Show Captions button below to view our live captions in either English or French. If you require help at any point during today's session, you can click on the tech support at the bottom left-hand side corner of your screen. As a reminder, there will be an opportunity to ask questions at the end of today's presentation. You can submit your questions using the chat feature on the right-hand side of the session page on this virtual portal. I will be the one reading the questions aloud for the presenters to respond at the end of the session. Now let's begin this educational session. I'm so pleased to introduce you all to Christina Van Sickle and Sue Botello. Christina is the Director of Professional Practice here at the Ontario College of Social Workers and Social Service Workers. In this role, Christina aids in developing resources to support registrants in their competent and ethical practice, reaches out to stakeholders to promote how college registration contributes to a culture of excellence in the workplace, and supports the college's mandate of protecting the public. Christina has worked in the field of geriatrics, mental health, addiction services, and has a wide-ranging leadership experience. Christina has developed and taught several courses, had a small private practice, and has served on provincial board of directors. Sue is the professional practice associate here at the college. She promotes the values of ethical and accountable practice by providing supports to registrants regarding the interpretation and the articulation of the college's standards of practice and code of ethics. Sue contributes to developing practice guidelines and other college resources, and also presents to registrants, prospective registrants, employers, and the public. Sue has worked in children and adult mental health services, as well as child protection and developmental services. She has also developed social and organizational policy and worked for several years at the post-secondary level, teaching and developing curriculum. Please join me in welcoming Christina Van Sickle and Sue Botello.
Thank you, Sarah. Welcome, everybody. We're pleased to speak to you today. My name is Sue Botello, and this is Christina Van Sickle, as Sarah has already described, and I'm not going to get into more detail on that. I will say that Christina and I are also registrants of the college, and registrant is going to be interchanged potentially today with the word member. So registrants are people registered with the college, of course, and we were using the term member for a very long time, and now we are now transitioning to using registrants. So we may use both, but they do mean the same thing, and you'll hear us probably say both. Just to let you know again that we will have a question period at the end, and that you can put your questions in the chat, which will be moderated by Sarah. The other thing to keep in mind is we're going to be kind of interactive today, which is kind of fun. We're going to be bringing some questions to you and some thoughts for consideration. And we're using some technology called the Mentimeter. And so we are recommending that you use your phone for that. You'll see there is the website to access and also the code that you will use to access our set of questions. You can also use your browser, and you can toggle back and forth between the presentation and Mentimeter if you like. However, the preferred functionality is to use your phone. And then I'll bring it over to Christina.
So whenever we have a conversation with the college, we like to show these 4 words because they help ground the content of our conversation. Because when you're a member of this college, you are someone who is professional, and that when you are a client who is receiving services from a registrant, you expect to be receiving services from a professional individual who's ethical because they follow a code of ethics and standards of practice. As registrants, we are qualified because we've done rigorous academic qualifications in order to become registered. And of course, we're accountable. We're accountable to the services that we provide. We're accountable to our employers, to the college, and most importantly, to our clients. So we just want to make sure that we ground the work that we're doing today in these 4 keywords. For our conversation today, we're going to look at the Code of Ethics and Standards of Practice, again, to ground our conversation in those core minimum requirements for professional and ethical practice. We're going to explore the ideas of competence, boundaries, and risk. And also going to look at our professional judgment. And then to get into the Mentimeter of it all, we're going to do some case studies and also look at some ethical decision making before we go to the question period. So the Code of Ethics and Standards of Practice lay out the minimum requirements for professional and ethical practice. And Sue and I get asked this a lot when we're doing consultations or presentations, that oftentimes people believe that they're best practices. They're not. A lot of good reasons for that, but some of them are because our scopes of practice are so broad, which is one of the really great things about the professions of social work and social service work. And our registrants can work in a variety of different fields, from shelters to kidney dialysis to hospice to policy development. And creating best practices for all of those would be not only impossible, but once you were finished, you'd have to start all over again. And so the standards are the minimum requirements for professional and ethical practice that apply to all registrants, and they're meant to be applied to our practice in conjunction with any legislation, and of course, our registrants' professional judgment. I'm sure many of you are aware that the standards of practice are broken up into 8 principles. And in relationship with clients, we talk about respecting client self-determination and ensuring that registrants are aware of their own values, biases, and needs, and that they don't impact the professional relationship. Competence and integrity we're focusing a lot on today, really, but essentially talking about that registrants need to be competent in the services that they provide to their clients. And we also talk about things in Principle 2, such as conflict of interest or dual relationships. Responsibility to clients, we talk about the fact that we need to have informed consent to work with our clients, and also look at things like how to terminate ethically with clients. The social work and social service record is pretty self-explanatory, that we talk about documentation in the record. Confidentiality, again, as well. We know that we need to have client consent or otherwise be required or permitted by law to release client information. Fees and advertising really more apply to individuals who are in private practice or offering fee for services. And of course, sexual misconduct. We have a principle about making sure that our registrants do not engage in sexual misconduct with clients. And as you know, that's been a large part of our conversation today, and it will be part of our conversation in this presentation as well. With competence, and this is an abbreviation of the interpretation from Principle 2, and it talks about the fact that we need to be responsible for being aware of the extent and parameters of our competence and our scope, and we need to limit our practice accordingly. And so what that means is that we need to ensure that we're aware of what we know and what we don't know. And if a client is coming to us to request assistance with an area that isn't part of our competence or isn't part of our scope of practice, we need to identify that. And we can either continue to work with that client after agreeing to get ongoing supervision or education, or we can also refer them onward to another professional who has that area of competence. And just we know that recommendations for particular services, referrals to other professionals, or a continuation of the professional relationship are guided by the client's interests as well as the member's professional judgment and knowledge. And so we're going to go to our first Mentimeter. So everybody get ready. Oh. And it looks like everybody has already joined in. Oh, that's fantastic. Fabulous. Look at how beautiful that is.
That's so colorful.
That's so lovely. If everybody hadn't already gone to our first question about what is competence, by all means, we will give it another few seconds. But what it is that, oh, look at where people are going. Please continue on. We wanted to have a word cloud that displayed in real time what our registrants feel that competence really means. And isn't that just so pretty?
It just keeps changing and shifting.
It's exactly. Fabulous. It's really nice. I'm going to grab a sip of water while we're still getting a few more entries.
Okay. Thank you, everybody, for kind of giving us, contributing to some of these, getting the words up here. It looks
exactly.
Great.
This is beautiful. It's really interesting, too, as this is going, regardless, knowledgeable and knowledge stay the main things. Isn't that something?
That's great.
Okay, everyone, we're going to stop for a second. We're going to take it up. But this is just so pretty. And I love that everyone's participating. Oh, wow.
Wow, that's really great. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much.
We'll sure to do a bit of a screenshot or something and make sure we can capture this for future reference.
That's beautiful. Thank you.
Yeah.
But, you know, just to see as well, as things are coming in, knowledgeable knowledge, integrity, accountability, professionalism, educated, qualified, ethics.
Training.
Absolutely.
Capable, you know.
All of these things. It's just beautiful. Excellent job, everyone. I'm going to scroll back now. Thank you for your input.
Yeah,
there will be more opportunities.
It's amazing, really. Thank you for that. Okay, so I'm going to discuss competence, and we've had already some, idea of what it means in terms of our college, our standards of practice, and in Principle 2.1, as Christina described. We're also going to try and understand today what it means to actually have competence. And it's important to understand that when we hear the word competence, we often sort of go to in our minds, that you have to be good and perfect at something, and we have to be quite competent and aware of all things. And in fact, it's even worse that the opposite word would be incompetent, and that is an emotionally laden word. So we want to, I guess, talk about that today and say that competence varies for everyone. And depending on your job length, your position, your years of education or practice, and how we develop our skills and knowledge and judgment is really what competence is about. And it can be a spectrum of that, right? So that's important to recognize. We're not suggesting that, everyone is going to be, top notch for everything, and that it's an experience that you continue to grow and learn from. And so when we talk about specifics about what you need to know, and at least to have sort of a starting ground, we know that applicable legislation is incredibly important, recognizing that in any workplace setting or in an area of practice, that there might be legislation that we have that is relevant to what we do on a day-to-day basis. So that helps us to know, that competence piece is going to move us through in a way that we're recognizing the legalities of that. Standards of practice, of course, as we know, we have those interpretations. Christina mentioned the principles that we have. So again, familiarizing yourself. Again, it varies workplace setting, education, job, role description. So being aware of that and what that means to you. Workplace policies is something you're definitely going to need to know. And we get questions like that sometimes. So understanding what the restrictions or the limitations, or perhaps, the different obligations or responsibilities that your organization has, and trying to ensure that you are fulfilling your job within that. Evidence-based interventions. So we don't do best practices, or we don't talk about best practices, but typically, right, a lot of areas of practice will have best practices that familiarizing yourself with is going to increase your competence, and again, minimizing risk is what we're trying to accomplish here. Parameters of service, similar to understanding even workplace policies or any of the above, and just knowing that there may be that time where you're not going to carry on certain duties or certain responsibilities. You're going to stay within the parameters of what you're meant to do in terms of your tasks or activities. Okay, so in addition to what you need to know, we thought that it would be important to understand sort of competence at a more of a contextual level, if you will. So understanding what you need to consider. So aside from all of the, documentation and the workplace stuff and that type of thing, knowing within yourself when it's time to seek consultation, knowing that, you may not have all the answers or know everything, or what's counting on you to make that decision. And so knowing when to ask for help. Continuing education that you require. Do you need professional training or development to further your understanding of where you're at in terms of your responsibility at your workplace or in your private practice, et cetera. And then conducting that ongoing self-assessment. So once again, understanding, where do I fit in? Am I needing some work? Do I have some additional improvement that's required? Am I really good at something? Can I support somebody else in my work and grow in my own competence as a result? And that at the end of the day, you may not have the requisite knowledge, and for no fault of your own, or maybe perhaps you're limited in your role and in your tasks. And you have to know when you're just not going to be able to provide service to somebody. And then, again, referring elsewhere. And then trying to really gain some competence in what you need to be working on. And then allow other people to also demonstrate their expertise and competence in their area. So we are going to Oh, yeah, we're almost going to.
Yep, we're close.
So with understanding competence, boundaries, and risk, which is obviously our themes for today, we know that these are inextricably linked. So in order to ensure that risk is minimized or exploitation or harm to clients, we know that competence has to, be prevalent in everything that we do. And we have to know that boundaries are being competent in your boundaries and understanding, what the appropriate decisions that you're making and how to, sort of conduct yourself in a way that's going to reduce any risk because you know your boundaries and you're aware of your boundaries. So speaking of boundaries, we are going to do a Mentimeter, and I think we, okay. I thought I would see a bunch of answers up there. So we want to hear from everybody in terms of how you define professional boundaries. So if we can just get people to start typing that in, that would be awesome.
Looking for another word cloud here.
I'm wondering if we have a little.
There we go.
Oh.
Excellent.
All right, thank you. Just a magic touch of a button. Yes, these are great. Professional boundaries. So your limits.
Inappropriate's interesting because they can be inappropriate or appropriate. Yeah.
Yeah. Ethical.
Respect, limits. I love these. So large.
Even the word strong, it's like, where do I stand? How do I conduct myself? And I feel good about the services that I provide. Yeah,
respectful.
Client-centered. Yeah.
Consistent. Business hours. I love that. Informed consent. Absolutely.
Which is very, very important, right? Especially in virtual practice and things that we know that happens.
Guidelines, expectations.
Well,
this gets kind of mesmerizing watching it change.
I know,
it's really neat.
It's almost like you just want to see what's next. Yeah, it's great. Thank you, everybody. Again, you're really contributing in a way that's helpful for everybody who's watching and participating. Yeah. So I see
non-attachment. That's interesting.
Yeah. So and obviously even some of your own personal experiences that you may have gone through. So looking at wow, I can't even focus, but ethical focus, knowing your limits. So you may have experienced in your practice or in your workplace ways of doing and working that has led you to understand what your boundaries are. And it can have, based on your organization, you have to know your limits and your rules in that organization, and it could look different everywhere as well.
Thank you, everyone. We're going to scroll off the screen now. This was really great, but I just love how respectful, clear, limits, and ethical are so prevalent.
Yeah.
Thank you for that.
So when we talk about boundaries and we talk about what they look like in terms of what the college would say, we define them as a set of roles and expectations in relation to client work. So we would say that the college registrant has a professional obligation to maintain professional boundaries and ensure that the needs of the client are paramount at all times. In short, professional boundaries require a registrant to only have a professional relationship with their client. When a registrant engages in conduct with a client that falls outside of what is required by a professional relationship, that is a violation of professional boundaries. So keep that in the forefront of your mind, that in terms of boundaries, there's that level of competence that you need to familiarize yourself with. Okay, and then, kind of putting that all together cumulatively, we know that professional judgment is really also very important part of the puzzle here. We know that it is an important part of our practice. We're reflecting on our decision-making, our assessment, and it is important to continually stay competent and to build competence. And part of that is included in that is reflection, consultation, critically analyzing all aspects of potential outcomes And so knowing why you decided to do what you did, and not just shooting from the hip, not just deciding on impulse and kind of going with the first thought that enters your mind. It's really a matter of saying, okay, let me slow down, let me think about this. What could potentially result in my decision or things that I'm going to do next? And if you're questioning that in terms of competence or boundaries, then you need to step back and do some of the things that we talked about earlier. So these are important pieces of the way that we facilitate our work and the way that we navigate through various issues and challenges and dilemmas that we have. So from here, we're going to actually now get into some case studies. So I'm going to pass it to Christina for our first case study.
Yeah, so we're going to change gears now, and we're really trying to highlight some case studies that show the connection between competence, boundaries, and risk, and they're based on questions that Sue and I receive in professional practice, and that people are calling to consult with us in the professional practice department, which you can as well, just to put that out there, another plug for us. So these are questions that we've received on a somewhat regular basis, so we wanted to bring these ideas to the fore. So in case one, a client lives in another jurisdiction and approaches you for service. You contact the regulatory body where the client is located to determine the regulatory requirements in that jurisdiction. In order to practice with the client, you must register with the regulatory body where the client is located. You don't want to pay the price for the required registration fee in the other jurisdiction, and you recommend to the client alternative service providers. The client insists on working with you and offers to pay the registration fees in the jurisdiction where they are located. And so we're going to flick to Mentimeter now. And what are the practice issues that a registrant would need to consider for this case? And this is not an exhaustive list. These are some of the key takeaways that Sue, it's really interesting when it happens on your computer really quickly. These are some of the key takeaways that Sue and I identified. And by all means, you can answer more than one here. But by all means, please think about what are some of the practice issues that the registrant would need to consider. I know, it's neat.
Here we go, look at all those numbers.
I know.
So we see cross-jurisdictional practice up there for sure, and equally climbing up with conflict of interest. The other two, of course, are representing as well.
It's like watching a race.
It almost is, yeah.
Right.
This is awesome. And like Christina said, you can pick more than one, and we can see how these impact.
And I'm sure, as many people can imagine, our inquiries that we've received in the professional practice department about cross-jurisdictional practice have increased exponentially over the past couple years during the pandemic, because we have a lot of registrants now who are practicing virtually. We also get contacted by social workers from other provinces who want to practice in Ontario with Ontario clients. So it's a really prevalent topic of conversation right now. And we do have a bunch of information on our website about it as well, under cross-jurisdictional practices on the website.
Okay.
So yeah, I think we've maybe...
All right, maybe we can keep the numbers going,
yeah,
and
keep the numbers going.
we can start talking a little bit about that.
Yeah,
okay.
absolutely.
Okay, so I'm just going to go through the first two there. We're going to chat about that in terms of competence, because these are obvious areas of consideration when you talk about competence and boundaries, of course. So as Christina mentioned, we get a lot of questions about cross-jurisdictional practice. And typically what we inform people about is the fact that, if you are going to be practicing virtually in somewhere outside of Ontario, where the client is located outside of Ontario, then it would be, up to you to check in with the regulatory body of that jurisdiction where that client would be located. So you would want to check and make sure that if there's any requirements to practice in that jurisdiction. That might include a registration, may include a fee. There's a variety of different requirements for each jurisdiction. We can't speak to that, and sometimes I do get asked. And there's just so many jurisdictions we couldn't possibly know. So we're talking about nationally, internationally, to do your due diligence and to check to make sure that when you're practicing in that jurisdiction that you're aware of what the requirements. In addition to that, checking with your liability insurance provider. Some people don't think about that and what that might mean to them practicing outside of Ontario. The other piece to keep in mind that we'll speak to here with legislation is, again, competence around, and boundaries, around understanding in that jurisdiction what legislation might exist that could impact your work with somebody. And in terms of examples that I think of, you talk about, for example, our privacy laws. Like, we focus on provincial privacy laws, our duty to report a child in need of protection. This is a provincial law. And so outside of Ontario, we could not, again, we would not be able to even know the differences in legislation. And we don't provide legal advice at the college, and we don't have the handle on legislation in terms of understanding the implications of what that means. If a client is somewhere in another jurisdiction and you are practicing, if you either overlook something or you are maybe jumping the gun on something and you shouldn't be, and you think because the duty to report in Ontario is the same as duty to report somewhere else, that could also lead to client risk in crossing boundaries, confidentiality breaches, et cetera. So I think these are, they're together, the cross-jurisdictional and the legislation, but knowing that we would never assume that there is similar legislation in other jurisdictions as in Ontario.
Okay. Yep. So then, of course, the other issues we want to look at as well is conflict of interest. And a conflict of interest is when a registrant has a personal, financial, or other professional interest that may influence them in carrying out their professional responsibilities. So a common example of conflict of interest is when the registrant is influenced by financial gain and not what's best for the client. And we could see that in this example, that could be potentially what's perceived as going on. And it could be that someone may assume that the client is, or pardon me, the registrant is being influenced by their ability to earn money in another province without paying the registration fee. And that's one of the interesting things about conflict of interest, is it doesn't have to be actual, it can be perceived. And so an individual who is informed of all of the circumstances would have reasonable concerns that the registrant is being influenced in carrying out the professional duties can also be a conflict of interest. So something really important to consider. Then we're looking at client best interest. We find that it's often helpful to ask some reflective questions. And it's often useful to discuss these questions with either a colleague or a supervisor, someone who's going to have an objective perspective. And so some of the questions that you might want to ask are, whose interest am I prioritizing in this scenario? Is it my own or is it the client's? Could the client benefit from working with another practitioner? Because that can be the case sometimes as well, is that you get a diversity of thought and perspective, and maybe that can benefit the client. Is the client overly attached or trying to please me? As we know that this can happen, that sometimes our clients want to continue to work with us when it's a possibility that maybe working with someone else would allow them to go to a new place or explore new things in their practice in their treatment or their journey. And if in this scenario where the client is offering to pay for my registration, what happens if you feel the need to terminate services with them? How does that work exactly? Because would they think that you're beholden to them because they've paid for the services? Would they think that you need to be offering them perhaps a preferential service that they can contact you at different times throughout the night or on the weekends? So it's a lot of things that you need to kind of consider about client best interest. And we know that client best interest and conflict of interest are linked because in both you're trying to ascertain how interests are influencing your decision-making ability and how to ensure that clients' best interests are paramount. And so we can see that looking at these issues that, spoiler alert, all of these different issues relate to this practice scenario. And we can see how it's really important to be competent about the different aspects about cross-jurisdictional practice, legislation, conflict of interest, because that's really going to help you inform your boundaries with a scenario, which is going to help you reduce risk. And so you can see from this discussion that it's a lot of different issues that are oftentimes intermingled that we need to be considering simultaneously. And this, again, ties back to what we were talking about, professional judgment. So so after we've taken up this, how confident do you feel about managing this scenario? Case one, where you've been asked to practice in another jurisdiction and the client will pay your registration fee. Ooh, people are feeling pretty confident. I like that.
Yeah, excellent.
I know it's kind of loaded because maybe you don't want to tell the college that you're not feeling confident. We can't see who it is. It's completely anonymous, just putting it out there. Yeah.
And we get a lot of questions, and that we welcome, and we continue to welcome questions. There's nothing wrong with asking and contacting us.
Thank you for the people who are saying somewhat confident and not confident. I appreciate your honesty. Thank you.
Absolutely.
That's okay. That's good.
Two are going head to head.
Yeah. This is great, everyone. Thank you. And as the answers are still coming in, just wanted to flag that if people are feeling somewhat confident or not confident, by all means, we have a recently released practice note. It's not our most recent one, but I think it was one before that on conflict of interest, wasn't it?
Spring of 2022, yeah.
Spring of 2022, we released practice notes that are called Navigating Conflicts of Interest, which look at these scenarios and, again, present a lot of reflective questions that people can consider when they're examining whether or not they're in a conflict of interest. We also have a web page called Cross-Jurisdictional Practice. It's under the Registrants tab on the college website, which will give you some more information. And, of course, you're always welcome to consult with Sue and myself as well.
And I know Sarah has indicated she's adding that to the chat.
Awesome.
So thank you very much.
Perfect. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Okay, fun.
Let's go.
Okay, so I'm going to review case number 2. So I'm just going to read this off here. You are a member of an interprofessional team and are contacted by the College of Physiotherapists of Ontario, CPT for short, regarding an investigation into your physiotherapy colleague's conduct with a shared client. Okay? CPT requests copies of your file for the shared client. You are unsure if you can comply without first getting the client's consent. So we are going to take a look at this question. Are you able to provide the client file to CPT? Okay, we got some people out the gate. Yep. Again, anonymous, and we are not.
We don't know.
We are not judging, and we want to hear what, or sort of see what people say. Okay. So lots of no's. Many no's. No yeses.
A lot of maybes.
Yeah. That's great. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, that's excellent. Thanks, everybody. I'm going to navigate back to the slide now.
Thank you. So, as you can see on the slide, we did have a lot of no's. However, I'm going to read this off to you because, and you can read this in our privacy toolkit, a guide to PHIPA, which is the Personal Health Information Protection Act. If you are a HIC, which is a health information custodian, you do not need a client's consent to disclose their personal information to the following people or organizations for the following purposes. So a regulated health profession college for the purpose of the administration or enforcement of the Drug and Pharmacies Regulation Act, the Regulated Health Professions Act, 1991, or an act named in Schedule 1 to that act. So the Regulated Health Professions Act has within it something specific that indicates that if a regulatory college requires to investigate their registrant, that they may access information without consent from another regulatory regulated professional to access client information if they have for investigation purposes, right? So if they need it. So I know many said no, and that's okay, but this is where understanding that competence piece and knowing, to check to say, okay, what does this mean to me? And it doesn't happen often. Like I think it's fair to say that we don't get these a ton in terms of questions, and so you may not know it sort of off the hop, and so we can appreciate that. But there is the piece there that you need to understand that, yes, if somebody reaches out to you from the College of Physiotherapists or the College of Massage Therapists, and you happen to have a shared client, that they can access that information from your file.
For the purpose of an investigation.
Yeah, for the purpose of an investigation, for sure. Yeah, as said. So, all right. So there are others. There are other pieces of legislation we'd like to throw out there in our Mentimeter now to see what legislation may permit you or permits you to disclose client information without consent. So we have here the Healthcare Consent Act, the Health Protection and Promotion Act, the Mental Health Act, Substitute Decisions Act. Again, we just kind of picked these pieces of legislation, but we'd like to hear what people think in terms of permitting you to disclose client information without consent.
Yeah, as Sue said, this is a non-exhaustive list. We didn't put the Child, Youth, and Family Services Act because we felt that that was probably too easy.
A little bit obvious, right?
That people would know that. So we tried to look for a smattering of other ones as well.
Thank you, everybody, again, for contributing. This is great.
And it does, what we've talked about as well, is that it oftentimes does depend on where you work, right? Because, if you're not working, in an area where mental health is prevalent, you're not going to know about the Mental Health Act, and you're not going to know about what it says and about the release of information or what have you. And so this kind of relates back to the points that we've made as well about being competent about the workplace policies and the legislation that applies to your practice.
Okay, well, why don't we go to, thank you very much. I appreciate the all the answers here.
This is great.
Yeah, very helpful. And so I think,
thank you for the participation.
Yes, thank you. Again, I would say that, spoiler alert, any one of these can include the potential to release client information for specific purposes permitted by law or by exception in law. And so, as Christina mentioned, it's context and legislation specific. So knowing, what legislation pertains to you and understanding under what circumstances disclosure of information may occur and under what context. And then looking at the relevant principles in the standards of practice. Knowing that we have a whole principle, number 5, on confidentiality, and we talk a lot about disclosure of information in principle 4. So checking with that as well. We also would recommend, of course, obtaining a legal consultation. So, we talk about the fact that lawyers, in terms of their profession, should be familiar with legislation and how they overlap, how they may contradict, all kinds of variations of how legislation impacts each other. So we wouldn't be able to offer that information. If you were to call for a consultation, we would talk about some of the principles and the standards, of course, but not about the legal aspect, although I think we can direct you to other information. Another really great resource is actually the Information and Privacy Commissioner. They have a lot of great information about release of information, personal health information in particular. So knowing where to look and understanding and building competence before you make those decisions. Because we don't want to put our clients at risk. We don't want to cross those boundaries. And again, we always say confidentiality is the cornerstone of our work. And so being really respectful of making any moves or decisions, because we will always get requests, in our field, and registrants will, for one reason or another, they may, kind of interact with other people and they're being asked these questions. So you have to tread very carefully so that you are, once again, understanding your competence and slowing it down, knowing your competence, your boundaries to reduce the risk and harm to clients.
And so just as you were thinking as well, it made me think that we're also going to get a lot of requests from people who are saying, well, you can give me this information. And oftentimes you can't, right? And so it's about being very careful and knowing the times that you can and you can't. And as you said, getting a legal consultation can be very helpful with that.
Exactly, yeah. Okay.
So we're going to move it forward now to our third case. This is our final case as well. So you're the manager of a college registrant who's being investigated per workplace policy due to a complaint about the sexual abuse of a client. The registrant resigns before the investigation concludes, and you are unclear if you need to report this matter to the college. So, what do you do in this scenario? Would you report? Would you not report? Or would you consult? And who that consult is with, it could be with Sue and myself, it could be with supervisor, with a manager, the lawyer.
Mm-hmm.
And again, it's anonymous, so if you want to say not report, we will not know who you are, and that's totally okay.
And it really begs the sort of the next steps for everybody too, and to understand, is this a further conversation to have at my workplace? Even in our presentation today, that could be a really good takeaway, to just say, okay, these are the questions that came up in the presentation at the college during the conference, and let's take some of these back and talk about them. Mm-hmm. So it doesn't have to be a sort of a slam dunk discussion today.
Yeah. Okay, so we'll go back. Oh, sorry, there's a few more that were coming in. I thought it slowed down, so I navigated away. So how to determine next steps in this scenario? One would be a really good idea to review the definition of sexual abuse. And now we've heard about this as well during the ALMED today, but it really bears remembering that the definition of sexual abuse for the college in the regulatory context is much broader than it is for the criminal context. And so of course it can mean sexual intercourse or other forms of physical sexual relations between a member and a client. It can mean touching a client in a sexual manner. Can be behavior of a sexual nature toward a client that has absolutely no clinical purpose. It can have remarks of a sexual nature toward the client, which could be commenting on breast size, asking a client out on a date, or using a word that's sexually suggestive. So again, very broad definition of what sexual abuse means. Also important to probably check what the mandatory reporting obligations are for the college. And if you are an employer, you're required to report the termination of a college registrant for reasons of professional misconduct, incompetence, or incapacity. And an employer must also make a report if they intended to terminate a registrant for professional misconduct, incompetence, or incapacity, but the registrant quit before they were able to. So if you are going to fire someone or you intend to and they quit, you still need to make a report to the college. The other aspect is that if you are a registrant of the college and you have reasonable grounds to suspect that a social worker or social service worker has sexually abused a client, you need to make that report to the to the college. And it's one of the things that we talk about when Sue and I are consulting with individuals who we do get a fair amount of phone calls from individuals who are like, I'm not sure if I need to report. I'm not sure what to do in this scenario. And we oftentimes use the analogy of reporting to Children's Aid, that it's not really up to us to determine whether or not a report meets the eligibility spectrum or if Children's Aid is going to follow up. That's their intake department's job. We make the report as long as it's done in good faith and based on the information that we have, and they need to determine if it meets their spectrum for follow-up. Similar for the college, that we have our colleagues in the Complaints and Discipline Department, they have an intake process that follows fair and procedural process, and that they determine whether or not an investigation is going to occur and what the next steps are going to be. So give them that information and they will be the ones to determine what next steps are. And as always, it's oftentimes, consultation. Don't make these decisions in isolation, right? You can consult with the college and get some legal advice as well. So just further to this conversation about sexual misconduct, and we know that boundaries define and set the roles and expectations for college registrants and their clients. And the relationship between a college registrant and a client is a professional one that's centered around the client receiving care from a college registrant. I think that's really important. It's a one-way street, right? And we've said this already today, and you've heard it, I think, even in this presentation, but to reiterate, college registrants have professional obligations to maintain professional boundaries and ensure that the needs of clients are paramount. Professional relationships require a registrant to only have a professional relationship with their client. When a registrant engages in a conduct with a client that falls outside what is required by the professional relationship, it's a violation of professional boundaries. And of course, sexual contact is strictly forbidden under the college's Code of Ethics and the Professional Misconduct Regulation under the Social Work and Social Service Work Act. So,
right. Okay, so we've had our 3 case studies, and we just wanted to summarize basically what we talked about today. And again, it's not exhaustive. We get a lot of questions, but we felt that these had to do, that it was a good kind of process looking at competence, boundaries, risk, and how it could all kind of come together. As we mentioned, they're inextricably linked. And so the first one was about navigating conflicts of interest and unusual client requests. So aside from even the cross-jurisdictional, there are other client requests that may come up that will challenge your understanding of your practice and potentially get you to look at becoming more competent in a particular area. Addressing requests for client information that may be permissible but require further probing. So again, like checking, making sure, I guess ensuring that you're very aware of what you're walking into when you're making some decisions, and then reporting obligations with respect to sexual abuse. So as Christina has just described fully, and how important it is to understand where our boundaries lie. So that's an important piece as well. So I know at the beginning we talked a little bit about what you should know, what you should consider, and these are all, kind of bringing full circle here. Looking at how do we increase our competence and how do we establish good boundaries. And so supervision, is up there, like checking in, making sure that, you're again, actively considering all of your actions and your conduct. You might also look at consultation as well. You're reviewing the standards of practice, what was relevant, what makes sense, and what's appropriate in this particular case that you might be thinking about or challenged by. You're reviewing the college resources. We have several on our college website. We have our resource room. If you open that up, you have your practice resources, and then there'll be a list of topics. And every one of those topics, you open them up, and they'll have several resources, whether they're practice notes, guidelines, webinars, and they all do really have to do with competence and boundaries. So reading those through and really understanding what we've written, because that's from the professional practice, based on some of these other dilemmas that have come up, we've published some really good material that I think is worthy of review. Contacting the professional practice department. So of course, absolutely checking in with us. We'll have a very fulsome discussion with you and sort of help with your understanding of what the standards of practice and the code of ethics say. And consulting with colleagues, knowing what's going on, having your finger on the pulse out there with other, people in your field is really important. And getting legal consultation, like we talked about. We're going to, keep reiterating that, because I think that's where, it kind of, that's where the rubber hits the road, is making sure you know what your the expectations are by law. And then, of course, all of that, and in isolation, the Continuing Competence Program is very important, the CCP. So you can take these resources, review your standards of practice, do additional things that you think that it's time for you to sort of understand more about, learn about, they have interest in, that may be appropriate and relevant to your practice. So all of these things will help to increase competence and will establish good boundaries. And of course, as a result, will reduce that risk, right?
And one of the tools that we like to talk about is the ethical decision-making tool, or the Ethics A tool. It's one of the resources on our website, because it can be another really helpful strategy in order to reduce risk. And so this was a tool that has been developed specifically for the social workers and social service workers in Ontario. It's based on legislation that's specific to Ontario and the Ontario context. And it requires that registrants go through a series of steps to help them in their decision-making process. And it's a tool that can be printed off, and you can use it for your own notes. There might be occasions that it's appropriate to put it in the client file. Like, maybe not. It depends, I guess, on the context. And we've even heard of registrants who use this tool as well for workplace scenarios that they're struggling with, because sometimes people find that their workplace policies are in conflict with the standards of practice, and that can be a real difficult conundrum. We talk to people a lot about that. Yeah. But first, we really want to examine the facts to even find it out if it is an ethical dilemma, or is it just a challenging practice scenario? Because sometimes we're in a situation where we feel really bad about what we have to do, but we know what we have to do, right? Like making that report to Children's Aid, at times that can be really challenging because of the specific context for the client. We need to think about the standards of practice, relevant laws, and workplace policies. You really need to hypothesize all of the different possible scenarios or options. And sometimes, I talk about this, but you've got to kind of look into that crystal ball and really try to figure out, what are the different possibilities and end results of the different options that you're going trying to choose. You need to think about the consequences for each option. Consult with others. Consult. It's such an important part of practice. Don't hold this to yourself. And then you're going to select your auction and you're going to document your process. And we often talk about this as well, is that it's so important to have that evidence documented of your decision-making process in case you ever get called into question about it, that you're going to be able to say, I didn't shoot from the hip, as Sue said earlier, that I was actually very methodical. There it is.
Yeah.
About what I did in my practice.
And I'll just add there that I always kind of joke with people when I talk about this tool, and I say my memory is very good, but it's very short. And so without having it down on paper or in our downloadable, it's fillable PDF, having sort of some record of what you did and why you did it will really just jog your memory, because things can come about, in a year or two or even more. And just being aware that, you thought it through back then, because you may not remember the details.
And it's our most downloaded tool as well. So just to kind of wrap it up, right, that we know that competence, boundaries, and risk, that this is an ever-evolving and a challenging process. And at no point in our careers are we done developing competence. We know that new evidence, new client scenarios, new practice settings evolve and develop every day. And we need to be aware of those in order to provide our clients with the best care that we can. Competence is essential, so we have to properly understand boundaries, because boundaries can change depending on context, client group, and practice setting or location. We've all borne witness to the explosion of virtual practice and how questions about competence and boundaries have had to be worked out in real time. And with the rapid advancement of technology, this is our new normal. We must continually assess and reassess our competence and reflect and maintain professional boundaries to reduce risk to clients. And at the end of the day, that's why we're all here, to help clients and to do no harm. Ongoing competence and proper boundaries are how we're going to do that. So that brings us to the end of our presentation today. So we're going to move it forward to questions. And we know Sarah Chowdhury has been moderating the chat for us and inserting some helpful links, so thank you for that.
Thank you.
Yeah, so Sarah, do you have any questions for us?
We do. Thank you, Christina and Sue. So I do have one question from a registrant around getting legal consultation. So they're wondering, what was the name of the legal institute that you had mentioned, or how can I find information around getting legal consultation that you may have mentioned during the presentation?
So I think what you're referring to, and I may be wrong, is the Information and Privacy Commissioner. That's the institution I had referenced, and they're not lawyers, right? They exist. Well, the commissioner exists that when there is a breach of confidentiality in the province, then you have to potentially reach out and inform the commissioner. So that's the reason they exist. However, they have resources, staff, people there are some lawyers who investigate these breaches, but for the most part, if you're looking for some information about privacy law and about, and again, that's not even just PHIPA, could be FIPA or the federal information potentially, but they focus provincially in Ontario, and looking at how you can understand some of the guidelines. They have information about virtual practice, electronic technology. They have information about sharing information, disclosure, when it comes to particularly disclosure to other parties, what that might look like, and again, how that interfaces with legislation. So you can reach out to them, you can ask for a consultation, but you can also, and it won't be a legal consultation, I want to be clear about that, but it's more of an information sharing opportunity. They can email you some information and links to the multitude of resources that they have. So that is, I think, what you're referring to, if I'm not mistaken. Beyond that, we talk about legal consultation, and it really is incumbent upon the registrant to seek out their legal consultation. They may have access through their organization or their agency, and so you might want to find out about that. They may also have professional liability insurance, which at times may cover some consultation from a legal advisor. And then there are other options, of course, taking the typical legal route to look for a lawyer who could just answer some of your questions.
It's one of the reasons that we talk about registrants obtaining professional liability insurance at the college. It's not required by the college, but it can be a really good idea. Your organization may have professional liability insurance, but if a situation comes up, they can choose to cover you with their liability insurance or not, and it's all dependent upon the risk to the organization. And Sue and I have both heard of instances where the organization determined that it was too much of a liability to cover their employee, and so they didn't do it, and so then the individual was left without liability insurance. So it can be a really good idea to get your own, and one of the perks of getting your own for a lot of insurance providers is that they offer you free unlimited legal consultation over the phone.
Thank you for that. Just a comment that I thought I would share. Sometimes we find ourselves caught in between when trying to apply what we know is best for the clients, when the client themselves do not seem to recognize the help we are providing to some of them. I thought that was an interesting comment.
It is. And it's true, and it's hard.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I remember, again, Sarah mentioned at the beginning, working in mental health and substance use issues, and one of our mantras would often be like, clients are allowed to make bad choices.
That's right.
As much as it can break your heart, it's the truth of it.
Right, we talk about self-determination, right, in the first principle of the standards. Yeah, so just understanding that it's not easy, right, but then you have to look at, where your limits are as well.
Thank you. There's a question, how do we realistically approach the fact that in our health and social care systems, there's not always a more competent individual, so an individual specialized training who's available, or a practitioner who's available in areas, and they're using a rural area as an example, and how do we approach that?
Yeah. Do you want to start? Do you want to start?
I can start, I suppose. I mean, I think that's a great question. Like you mentioned, particularly in rural areas, there are people that are working, very sort of grassroots, or they're just trying to do their best with great intentions, and day to day there's unique scenarios and situations and challenges, and they may not have someone to turn to. Or what we find sometimes too is even if they do have access to somebody, it may not be a social worker, a social service worker that perhaps doesn't understand the complexities of the situation. And so it's hard to really have a short and fast answer to that. I think you have to keep seeking the support that you can, continue to get some supports potentially through an association of social work or social service work association who advocate for social workers, or they're the voice of the social worker, social service worker. And, we just start to kind of figure out whether there are other people who are in similar situations who you can talk to, discuss the situation with. I think virtual practice also has opened the doors a lot to allow for potential supervision or consultation, to other locations. So having somebody who might be in downtown Toronto providing some supervision. Now, I would add to that, of course, that there may not be the exact type of situation that they could speak to because of the complexity of their setting, being in a rural situation. But to look at other options that out of the box a little bit, thinking through and checking with our resources, and then giving us a shout. We don't provide, supervision. We're not a replacement for supervision, but we certainly can, understand the scenario and, provide some information that might be helpful.
And just in addition to that as well, that there's a website that you can go to if you were looking to get your own supervision as well, findasocialworker.com, and that you can go in and you can search for somebody based on whether or not they provide virtual service or if they provide supervision. And so that may be a way to reach out. And Sue had mentioned the associations as well, and that both associations have local engagement networks. So it might be contacting this association that you may or may not be a member of, but to get engaged with either social workers or social service workers in your area that maybe you could consult with on an anonymous basis.
Excellent.
Thank you for that. And speaking of supervision, there's a question around wanting to hear more about ethics in community development and social administration. So for example, accepting or sitting on boards, as well as being a supervisor.
Sure. So in a rural, or sorry, was it in a rural? It was in a community development situation. Yeah. So certainly we know that our registrants work in a variety of different practice settings. Community development is where I did my last placement, actually. And it's an area where certainly members can get involved and be on a board. I wonder if for the supervision piece, the question that's being asked here is whether or not there's maybe training involved for that. Oftentimes when you sit on a board, there is. You may be able to connect with other local professionals as well, we don't have to receive supervision necessarily from someone who is a college registrant. It could be from another, I mean, specifically if you are providing the controlled active psychotherapy, it could be for one of the other regulatory bodies who has access to the Controlled Act. You could receive supervision from someone of those regulatory bodies. You could certainly as well, when sitting on that board of directors, as well as you know, when you're on a board, you do have the ability to go to the organization and ask them for certain training as well, which can be also helpful when looking for advanced skills and supervision. Was there another aspect to add to that?
I think that covers it. I mean, just the supervision in general. It's just important to just be creative. I think the ideas were really helpful.
Thank you. A lot of positive comments, just thanking you both for this presentation, how informative it is. I think we'll maybe take one last question. Wanting assistance on finding information on work policies and college policies when they clash, and how to approach that.
I'm going to go for this one. Okay.
Yeah,
I like this question. So workplace policies, of course, you know, to find out what they are, you're going to contact your the administrator at your organization, your supervisor, your manager. So you should have access to policies. It can be interesting as well when the policies aren't written down, that they're just more practices. But second part of that question is looking at workplace policies that are perhaps in conflict with the standards of practice. So the standards of practice talk about the fact that we need to advocate for workplace policies and practices that are in alignment with the standards of practice. That can be very tricky, though, and we've spoken to people about this, and this can be a difficult thing, because at the end of the day, the college does not pay your mortgage, your employer does. So what we talk about the fact is that that advocacy can take many forms, and that it could be just a matter of writing to your supervisor, writing to your manager, to whoever the superior individual is, documenting your concerns, asking to have a meeting in order to discuss this, asking to coordinate a consultation with Sue and I. Sue and I will often do consultations with groups of people as well at an organization or a place of employment. It can take a variety of different forms, so again, getting creative, as Sue said. But the key part about that as well is documenting your actions, about what actions you've taken, who you've spoken to, and when, because that's going to be your record of the advocacy that you took in order to bring workplace practices and standards into alignment with the standards of practice. And so your advocacy may not be successful. It may not be successful at first. You may have to continue to ask for those regular meetings. Hey, about that issue that I wanted to bring forward, could we revisit that? And so it could just be an ongoing work that you need to do, but keep record of it, keep documentation of it, because again, if for whatever reason you were ever called into question about that, that you would have your evidence to say, I have been advocating. I have been advocating to bring my workplace into practice with the standards. In extreme cases, we've certainly spoken to individuals who've left their workplaces because they weren't in alignment with the standards of practice and that violated their personal ethics so much. But hopefully by being creative, doing your advocacy work and keeping documentation of that, that will hopefully help to change the tide at your workplace.
Yeah, I would just add that we have a couple resources as well, right? So on our, again, our resource room, there's two that speak specifically to your employer, your workplace. Just being familiar with maybe checking those out, see what they have to say as well, and then just again, like Christina mentioned, recognizing that documenting the best that you can, that in and of itself potentially might be the only thing that you can do, and providing a solution. So I think footnote 10 of Principle 2 says to come with a solution. And again, some people don't feel comfortable though. I understand that. They just feel like they're the lone wolf out there. They're rocking the boat. And so finding a sort of a time and place that's important or effective, that you can get some response. And if that doesn't work, you just document that you've done your best. And keeping in mind, too, that some workplace policies, if they're best practices, that's not something that's potentially something that the college will say, this documentation over that documentation, or it takes this long to submit a report. Like sometimes people are, as Christina mentioned, sort of ethically pulled in different directions, and they think that something should be done a certain way. But if you take a look at our standards as well, recognizing that they're minimum standards of practice, and that we could recognize that there may be best practices out there. So I often say, check with your colleagues, see what's going on out there. What are other agencies doing? If you work for sort of an aging population, or a service that provides services to aging population, check all the aging population services in Ontario. Find out what's happening in terms of their process. So I think that's an important piece as well. And so keeping in mind that we have to always just do our best to advocate, but we don't pay your mortgage, so I suppose at the end of the day, you have to make some decisions that are important to you, but document.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you both for that. That was really informative and a great last question to end on today. So thank you. So this concludes our educational session for today. A big thank you to Christina and Sue for a really informative presentation around competency. I'm sure, like me, you found it very insightful and, again, really great takeaways for today. So thank you for that. On behalf of the college, as a token of appreciation, we've made a donation to the National Center for Truth and Reconciliation, an organization chosen by Christina. The center is a place of learning and dialogue where the truths of residential school system experiences honored for future generations, and they also support residential school survivors. The college has also made a donation to the Interval House of Hamilton, an organization chosen by Sue. Interval House of Hamilton provides emergency shelter, safety planning, and support services for women with or without children that have experienced abuse or violence. So thank you again, Christina and Sue.
Thank you.
Thank you.
As a general reminder, for those sessions that you may have missed earlier today, including the boundary considerations in private practice that's going on at the same time as this session, you can access them immediately after today's event on demand through the conference platform. Also, a reminder, following the event this evening, you will be getting an email to complete a post-event feedback form to share your experience for this year's event. Please complete it. We do appreciate your feedback. At the end of the survey, there will be a PDF link that you can click on to access your certificate of participation, which you can fill out and print for your records. So this concludes this year's annual meeting and education day. Thank you to everyone for your participation, and I hope that you were able to make the most of this virtual event. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.